Thank you everyone for joining us. My name's Tim Hart. I'm the Electoral Committee co-chair. I use he, him pronouns. This is the second of our 3 Q&A sessions for candidates seeking Twin Cities DSA endorsement in our second round of consideration for 2022. Today we're joined by Representative Athena Hollins. They are the current incumbent and are seeking re-election in State House District 66B. This is an opportunity for Twin Cities DSA members to ask questions to candidates seeking our endorsement and to consider their answers before our endorsement meeting and vote. So this is an opportunity for folks to ask questions that'll help you make a decision about whether the chapter should make an endorsement in this race. The format we're going to go through is I'm going to hand it over to Athena Hollins to make a quick introduction, and then we're going to move into some pre-submitted questions that we have, as well as throughout the pre-submitted question section, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. There's a little Q&A icon, and folks listening in can submit questions through that, which we will get to after we have finished up with the pre-submitted questions. Then a little bit of next steps for members tuning in. Once all candidate Q&As have been held, membership will meet to formally discuss the endorsement considerations, and we hope members will be engaged and discuss the decision in other forums as well, including the chapter Slack channels. After the meeting, the endorsement ballot, which will be conducted by OPA will be emailed out to members who will have 1 week until April 6th to respond with which, if any of the candidates that we're considering, you feel that the chapter should endorse. I think that's everything as far as the administrative stuff. So I'm going to then turn it over to Representative Hollins for a brief introduction.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Athena Hollins. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the current representative for District 66B, which is sort of the northern neighborhoods of the city of St. Paul. Think Como Park, the North End, and part of the east side of St. Paul. I've been a DSA member for about 2 years, and I got involved because a constituent of mine was like, if you believe in all this stuff, why are you not part of the DSA chapter? And so she really got me involved. I have to say, although I was involved when I ran 2 years ago, I didn't ask for the DSA endorsement because I felt like I really wanted to build relationships and build community with DSA members before asking for their support. And so with some encouragement from friends who are DSA members, they said I should seek the endorsement this time around. So I am, I'm very happily seeking the endorsement in this race from our DSA chapter. I think that you'll find that our values align and that I'm very passionate about, about representing what the DSA stands for at the state legislature. And I fought pretty passionately about that with a number of individuals. So really looking forward to hearing questions that folks have and hopefully, building more community with y'all.
Thank you. So you touched a little bit on this in your opening, but the first question that we have is, what is your general theory of how change happens? And if elected, what would you like your relationship with TCDSA to be?
I believe a change happens when you build relationships and coalition with people who have similar values as you. So it really takes, in my opinion, it takes a groundswell of movement from, the people and not the people at the top who are leading, but pressure from the folks who are just average, everyday individuals standing up and saying this is something that we want to have. And I mean, I think that's really where Twin Cities DSA is most impactful because you have that tie to the people, everyday individuals who are interested in creating a better Minnesota and a better Twin Cities for all of us. I think that the way I would like to stay engaged, and the way I've tried to stay engaged with other organizations that endorsed me last time around, is keeping them posted on things that we're doing, asking their input about bills that I'm working on, and then also working with them on engagement, really across, whether it's across the city or across the state, to try to push for the things that we know we need to do. A good example of this is I'm working on the no-knock warrant ban bill. I'm the chief author of that bill. And I am working with Isaiah and Take Action to try to get them to, to work with them to have their members reach out to their legislators to say, this is something that's important to us. And even if it's, even if you're not in Minneapolis where they're being used frequently, it's important to us that people aren't being shot and killed while they're asleep on a couch. And, I think as a legislator, I have reach within my district and maybe even within my city or the Twin Cities, but I don't have this expansive reach that I think a lot of organizations have really built up that relationship with other organizations and other individuals to sort of bring that groundswell that's needed for change. Because let's be real, in the legislature, I'm one of like 100 something legislators, right? So I can't do this by myself. It really does take a team effort to make anything happen.
Thank you. Going off of that a bit, you mentioned your district and community groundswell. Would you be able to tell us a bit about what your approach is to community engagement and the ways that you try to bring the movement with you into office?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can tell you from last time, I'm like, what last campaign season, um, we really worked hard, right? I went up against an incumbent of 18 years um, and challenged him for the DFL endorsement. Um, and actually lost that DFL endorsement and then continued on to a primary and won the primary and won the primary kind of overwhelmingly. Every precinct I won. So it really took a lot of organizing effort on our part and a lot of outreach in ways that I think are not traditional to the sort of standard two-party method. We didn't just door knock, we didn't just do flyers. We tried to reach people at every different level that we possibly could, whether it was text messages. We had some of our supporters writing letters to their neighbors and bringing their neighbors along to come meet me at, meet and greets. We had a strong online presence. So making sure that we were advertising to people where they actually were. We did outreach in, culturally specific newspapers and TV shows. We translated our materials into Spanish and Hmong to make sure that we were getting as deep a reach as possible when we were campaigning and to touch, to try to touch every person that is in this community and bring them along with us because we really felt like that was something that was lacking um, from my predecessor was that the sort of status quo was good enough. And if that meant that there wasn't that many people turning out to vote, if that meant there wasn't that many people who were showing up to have conversations, or if it was the same, like 10 or 15 people, that was okay. And that was really, that was what we were rallying against was it's not okay to have the same 10 or 15 people. Generally, people who are particularly privileged have the time and energy, and for the most part are either, retired or, um, significantly well off, like, I won't say rich, but significantly well off to have that privilege to engage with their legislators in a more like traditional and formal fashion. I think you probably all recognize that being able to take time off of work and go to the Capitol to talk to your legislator from the time periods of 9 to 5 are just totally unrealistic for the vast majority of people in my district. Whether it's because they are working one job, multiple jobs, because they have children that they're taking care of, because they have elderly families that they're taking care of. It's just not a reality. And so our goal was to make me and also just our campaign in general as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And hopefully, bring it to where they are already looking. So when we were on, like Hmong TV, we were hoping like you're already watching Hmong TV and we're coming to you. We're making it as easy as possible for you to hear our message, for you to learn a little bit about me, and for you to be engaged, know when the primary date is, know when the general election date is, and try to turn out as many people as possible.
Awesome. Just letting folks listening in know, while we're going through these questions, if any new ones occur to you, feel free to use the Q&A function down at the bottom there to submit any additional questions that we'll get to after these. You touched on sort of traditional politics as it had been done, and I'm going to come back to that in a sec. But you also touched on sort of how you tried to reach out to constituents in your last election. And so the next question I have for you is, how have you, and if reelected, how will you maintain accountability to both your constituents and the movement, and use your influence and power to those ends?
So I think that's a really good question, and I want to be really transparent here in that my goal was when we got into office to continue this engagement with our community and to continue being as accessible as possible. And I feel like I didn't do as good of a job as I should have um, in that. And I think part of that is because of COVID-19, and part of it is because the learning curve when you get to the legislature is just insanely steep. And I could not have predicted what it was going to be like to be in that setting um, before I got there. But that being said, my goal is to, continue working with individuals and hopefully um, to build a sense, like the thing I say every time I do a town hall or every time I talk to folks and we have, either phone conversations or in-person conversations is, my power comes directly from all of you. I'm only there because you put me there. And so if you have opinions about things that are happening, I want to hear those opinions and I need to have that input. Even if that input is as simple as a form letter that you just put your name to, that still has an impact for me. When I get 100 letters that have, even if it's 100 form letters, but with 100 different people sending them, that means something. And so trying to tell people that this is a two-way street. This is something where I will give you information about what I'm doing, but I also would love feedback about what I'm doing and feedback about the things that are most important to you. And that feedback doesn't have to look complicated. It doesn't have to look pretty or like formal in some sort of formal letter writing situation. It really could just be a text message that says, hey, I'm super concerned about catalytic converters or whatever it is that you're concerned about, because that is helpful for me as I make decisions going forward. What was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
So the question was about maintaining accountability to the movement and your constituents, and how you use or would use your influence and power to those ends.
Yeah. And I think, so that's the communication portion, but also the accountability portion, because when people are mad about what I'm doing, I hear from them, right? And I think I'm a big believer that it's the responsibility of an elected official, if they strongly feel, whatever it is that they're working on is the right direction, to explain that to individuals. So I've had some really in-depth conversations with constituents who, don't agree with my votes on police funding, or they don't agree with my stance on, sports betting, things like that. And I appreciate their feedback, but I also want them to know where I'm coming from when I make those decisions, because I think that it's the responsibility of an elected official to bring folks along. Like, it's so easy to say, well, these people, they really like my police chief and they said my police chief is great and therefore I can't support any police accountability. Like, it's your responsibility as an elected official to engage with your constituents and say, like, this is the reason why we're looking to do this. This is how it's going to work. And this is why it's better for everybody. So I do think the accountability part goes both ways too, where I want to hear what their opinions are, but I also think that I need to educate and bring them along with us so that they understand what we're trying to create and trying to build for our community, and recognize that often when we're trying to, or at least when I'm trying to build for our community, it's for those who have the least among us, right? Like it's the people who aren't going to be reaching out to me. It's the people who don't have that opportunity, and it's the people who are most disparately impacted by the status quo, and therefore trying to get my constituents to put themselves in their shoes and say, I get it, it hasn't impacted you, you don't see anything like that, but you have to trust me that there are people who are being impacted by this, and there are people whose lived experiences are like literally they are filled with trauma because of what has happened in our in our current society. And therefore I'm happy that it hasn't happened to you, but we're trying to build something for them also. I hope that answers the question. Sorry.
I think you got to it. And going off of that, I feel like you just gave a bit of your thoughts around how you approach being an elected official and how you go about that responsibility. And that gets us into the next question that I had, which is, how would you describe your politics and in particular your relation to the DFL? And how do you see your relationship to both current and future DFL leadership in the House?
Ooh, that's a tricky question. So, I mean, I think I describe my politics as progressive. And my relationship to the DFL is tricky. It's tricky. It is a system that has, I think, in its philosophy, aims to be inclusive and aims to be something good. But I think, even just this most recent election cycle, or this campaign cycle and endorsement, we can see that it has a tendency to support the status quo and a tendency to, maintain structures and powers that have always been, simply for the sake of the fact that they've always been. And in that sense, I am at odds with it. And I think from that perspective, I have been at odds with DFL leadership occasionally throughout my time at the House. Certainly, I won't say Governor Walz is not a fan of mine, but we've had our differences, and there are things that he and my leadership at the House would very much like me to support that I simply cannot support. The increase in funding for National Guard to come through was one of the times. I think I voted against it both times that it came up. And I won't say it puts me in a precarious place, because I'm in a very blue seat that is, probably at least as progressive as I am, which is great. So they don't ever question me about these decisions. But that being said, it does put me, I think, in a difficult position with current leadership within the House, where I'm trying to think of how to say this without putting my foot in my mouth. I think it's just tricky. I think it's tricky, and I think that my impression is that the House leadership seeks to find ways to not silence but control members like me, and members who are more not defiant but independent, but not in the weird, like, the fake independent way where they're really Republicans, but who are more just thinking on their own and making decisions based on their own. And part of me says I will not make any friends in DFL leadership, and the other part of me says they will try to become my friends because they would like me to stop making so much trouble. And I am neither I'm neither in favor of or opposed to becoming friends with leadership, but I know that my goal is to go to sleep at night without any regrets and to feel good about the choices that I've made. And if those choices do not coincide with what the DFL wants me to do, then so be it. I have no intentions of being in this my goal is not to be in this seat for 18 or 20 or 30 years. And my goal is not to necessarily become a chair or wield incredible power. My goal is to make a difference in my community. And I'm going to do that one vote at a time, whether they like my votes or not.
Thank you. So going from that kind of wider picture to on a more specific issue, uh, could you tell us what your thoughts are on the Minnesota healthcare plan? And considering both the opposition inside of and outside of the DFL, how you would seek to advance single-payer healthcare in Minnesota?
Yes, love the Minnesota healthcare plan. Love Senator Marty for bringing it and being a passionate advocate for it and continuing to push for it, every single day. I'm part of the Minnesota healthcare plan caucus that just recently started. And I think that the way to move it forward, and I feel a little upset about this, was really this COVID-19 situation. Like, there's no better example of why we need universal healthcare than, a pandemic where millions of people die. And so it's a little frustrating that we've, I don't want to say we've gotten through it, knock on wood, but we're close to getting through it, or it's getting better, and we still are in the same exact space. I think that my colleagues at the House, and especially as there's turnover at the House, my DFL colleagues are slowly getting on board and understanding the need for this. Um, my perception is that we have to dismantle the insurance process and the power the insurance companies have over our members in order to move it forward. Because to me, that's the real impediment here. I mean, we have doctors in the legislature, right? We have nurses, and they're all in favor of it. Like, literally, practitioners are in favor of it. People are in favor of it. And the only people who aren't in favor of it are insurance companies and privately owned hospitals that are making record profits and, but come to us and say, there's no way we'll be able to survive if there's if there's healthcare for everybody, and yet they turn around and are paying their CEOs like millions of dollars. So I think really, like, one of the biggest things we could do to change that is get that money out of the legislature and get those lobbyists away from our members, because and I don't want to be disparaging of people. I can tell you, I have spoken to some of those lobbyists, and they are very persuasive. Right? Like, they know how to do it. They have all of the information. They have, like, these pretty graphs, and they are very persuasive. And I think that for most people, if that's the side they're hearing and that's the only side that they're approached by, it's easy to be swayed by that and say, oh my gosh, well, what are we going to do? And the other thing is, they know how to get to particular people, right? So when they come to me, they say, your constituents are going to lose jobs. There's not going to be jobs, because they know I don't care about whether the hospital makes money or not. But they come to me and they say, all of those people are going to be fired, and they're all your constituents. And so, I think they know how to tap into the fears of each different individual that they are addressing. And so I think getting them out of the system and saying, you're no longer allowed to lobby on this would be incredibly helpful, because at least then we would have an even playing field, saying, going from something neutral to something better, as opposed to them saying it's all doom and gloom and we're all going to die.
Thank you for that answer. And I think now we're going to, you mentioned a couple questions ago how you try to engage with folks who uh, are less likely to reach out, don't tend to have a voice in these procedures in sort of normal status quo operations of these things. And on those lines, could you speak to both how you have and how you plan to ensure that by virtue of your election and in your engagement with the community, you make sure that you are specifically giving the undocumented community the representation that it deserves and needs. I think you might be muted.
I am muted, sorry. That's a really good question. I mean, I think that when we reach out to individuals, we reach out not based on whether or not they're documented. And we do outreach to like apartment buildings, and we do every apartment. We're not like picking and choosing who's there. And so I think that, you know, and this is one of my beefs with the DFL is relying too heavily on this sort of curated list of people that is already the people that are engaged. And then if you keep going through them, and then some of them move and some of them die and some of them, you know, whatever happens, that list just gets smaller and smaller, and it doesn't expand at any point in time to include more people who are engaged in the process. And so, you know, to that end, I think the way that we did some of our outreach, not all of it, because some of it was targeted, but a lot of, you know, some of it was not. I think targeting individuals in a less not discriminatory, but like in a less controlled manner, which I recognize is not necessarily very efficient time-wise, but it's something that you can do if you seek to engage individuals, not just leading up to an election, but also throughout the entire year, right? It's something that it requires greater energy and output from a campaign, but it's something that's absolutely doable. And then also making sure that your materials are translated into languages that folks can understand. We did written materials that were translated, as well as had phone bankers who spoke multiple languages, and we did like voicemails in different languages. So we tried our best to make sure that every person that we were reaching out to would be able to participate in some sort of way. And it's not easy, because it's hard to predict when somebody, you know, what language they speak. It's hard to predict, you know, if they're fluent English speakers and they, you know, they've been here for generations. It's one of those things that's difficult when you're doing it remotely, especially, which is what we were doing in COVID-19 times. But I think as we look more towards doing more in person, we're definitely going to hire organizers that are bilingual and hope to engage those individuals who may or may not be documented in campaign and in democracy in general, to get them participatory and feeling like somebody out there cares about how they're doing and what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. And then at the Capitol, I mean, I am a big supporter of any of the legislation that goes through supporting undocumented individuals and supporting, you know, immigrant families. I think we don't have as much control over it on the state level as they do on the federal level, but there are certain things that we're able to do. And my buddy in the legislature, Sandra Feist, does a lot of work in immigration law, and therefore is carrying a lot of the immigration work. And I have signed on to, I think, all of her bills that affect undocumented individuals, because we know that representation just wasn't there. Like literally, because she came in as an immigrant, you know, an immigration law attorney, she had all this insight about what was happening to these folks, and was able to start working on legislation to address that right away. And I mean, that's another reason why we need more diversity at the legislature, but that's a whole nother issue, so I won't get into that.
So I've got a couple more questions that have been pre-submitted, but I think we're on a topic that it makes sense to go to one of the questions we've got while we've been talking. So the question that we had submitted is, I'd be curious to hear you talk about who you see as your allies in the House and in Minnesota politics. DSA has a hopefully growing foothold in the Senate, but less so in the House. What are the prospects for a more left pole of power in the Minnesota House if you're our first endorsed House member.
Oh gosh, would I be the first endorsed House member? Oh, that's true.
I
I didn't
believe so,
think.
yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah, I mean, well, Aisha Gomez, first of all, who I think is if she's not a card carrying DSA member, she might as well be. So um, I would say Aisha Gomez, Esther Agbaje, Jay Zhang, um, Hodan Hassan are all, I mean, I hate to say it, they're like my gang at the legislature. I mean, at the House, they are the ones that, um, for the most part, we all stand together in voting against things. And I think they're also the ones that, to my mind, are not that everybody else is, but they definitely don't angle towards, um, they're not looking at like, how can I become leadership? I need to like play the game in order to become leadership. They're really out there just trying to do the best for their community and doing what their community wants from them. And so I think they would be strong candidates for that. I would also say so those are all uh, Posse Caucus members, so people of color, Indigenous caucus members. But we also have a number of suburban members in my freshman class who have just been tremendous, like in their support of a lot of the work that we've been doing, and who are, I mean, so I would say, Jess Hansen, um, to some extent, Kayla Berg, uh, Liz Ryer, Liz Bolden, have all been like unapologetically progressive. And um, and I think it's really important to note that they are not in the Twin Cities. Like, I mean, they're in the metro, but they're not in the Twin Cities. I get a lot of pushback on some of the work that I'm doing where I have suburban members go, oh, I couldn't possibly sign on to that. I don't know what my people would say. I'm not sure what my police chief would say, blah, blah, blah. And they're just there for it. They're like, yeah, let's do it. And they have no qualms with signing on to really progressive legislation. Um, and I really appreciate their leadership in that, and the fact that they are not like they much like me, they think that it's their responsibility to talk to their constituency and explain why these things are happening and why it's important, and to not shy away from them because your constituency might not understand it. So I actually think there's a ton of potential for individuals in the House. It's just a matter of tapping into them and, whether or not they're scared of the DSA label.
Thank you. So I have one last question and, well, a couple last questions. And then unless anyone wants to submit another one while we go through those, I think that will wrap up our session today. So the next question that I have is, what steps do you support toward an end to cash bail?
Oh gosh, all of them. I mean, we just need sorry. We just need to we need to end cash bail. I know there's been bills out there to support that and to try to make that a reality. Um, and I am in support of all of them. Like, it's a huge issue. And I think I keep thinking about the Minnesota Freedom Fund and how there's so many GOP pushes against the Minnesota Freedom Fund. You're like, it wouldn't actually be necessary if you just ended cash bail. But here we are. No, it's like a discriminatory practice. It penalizes people who have nothing. It's a stupid practice, especially when you see people who have done truly horrific things able to bail themselves out because of those truly horrific things that they've done. Whereas somebody who does almost nothing or something very small is unable to get out because of it. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a racist practice, it's a discriminatory practice, and it has to go. So whatever we can do to push that forward, I'm in favor.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think this is going to be our last question for the day, and it's a bit less specific than the ones that we've gone over so far. It's is there anything that you had prepared for, been planning on speaking on, want to make sure folks know your position on that we didn't get to in the questions that we had?
Oh, I guess the one thing that I do want to speak on, and this probably like my campaign manager would be kicking me if he saw this or if he was here, but like I really respect the amount of time and energy that the DSA puts into their endorsed candidates. And I think you have some tremendous races in front of you, like some contested races and some really interesting races where people haven't necessarily been greatly engaged in a really long time. And so uh, in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, please put your energy in those places instead of my uncontested, like, I mean, knock on wood, still uncontested, conventions tomorrow, but uncontested race where we will be putting in that energy either way. So not to say you shouldn't endorse me, but to say, I hope that if you do endorse me, that you still are prioritizing these other races in these other districts that haven't gotten the attention that they need, because there's just such a tremendous need out there. And I love my district, and I'm going to do everything that I can to turn people out and to get people engaged and make sure that they are participating in every level of government. But there might be other candidates who need your help more. So I'm not arguing against myself, not negotiating against myself, but I just really appreciate this opportunity, and I want to like show respect and acknowledgement that like what you all bring to the table is people power, right? And I recognize that, and that's way more valuable than money. And so just make sure you're spending that people power wisely.
Who can argue with that type of answer? All right. So that is everything that we have as far as questions, and I think that will wrap it up for us. Like I said at the beginning, the next steps for members are this Q&A, and the questionnaire will be available for members to review. And we're going to be having our endorsement meeting next week on Tuesday at 6:30. Folks are invited there to discuss the endorsements that we have for consideration. And after that, an endorsement ballot will be sent to members in good standing, and people will have 1 week until April 6th to respond to that with any candidates that you feel the chapter should endorse. And with that, I think that is everything. Thank you so much for joining us, Athena.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Take care.